Thank you very much, Guy, for this kind introduction, and I would also like to thank to organizers, especially to Caroline, Analyse, and Erika for organizing this conference, and also for this opportunity to present my paper here in Brussels. So, I didn't understand everything what was Guy speaking, but in general, my presentation will be on the interiors of the most important Art Nouveau building that was built and that is preserved in Croatia, building of the National and University Library and the State Archives. So it's probably much more related to the presentations that we had yesterday, because it's like an art historical presentation. It will be analysis of the style of the building, of the artists and artisans that worked on the building, on the political background, and you will see it. So it's not so much on accessibility, but no matter of that, I think, or I hope you will get the message that I want to give to you. So, just for basic introduction, for those that perhaps do not know, I've heard many times at this conference the question whether is there any kind of Art Nouveau in Croatia or only that building, and what's about the history of early 20th century Croatia. So I think this introduction is really necessary. So I'm talking about the building in Zagreb. Zagreb is, you probably know that, capital of Croatia. At the beginning of the 20th century it was also capital of Croatia, but Croatia wasn't an independent country, but semi-autonomous province in Hungarian part of Austria-Hungary, this huge empire that is very important for history of Art Nouveau. They also had implications in terms of this furnishing of the interior of the building that I will speak about. So it's important to emphasize it. During the 19th century, Zagreb developed really fast, as most European cities, because of its role as a political capital, as a cultural capital. Whole new part of the city called Lower Town developed south of the old city core, and this Lower Town is of course very typical example of 19th century city with this grid-like structure of streets. And in the middle part of Lower Town you can find a series of parks and squares that are called, or this part of the city is called because of this of the specific shape of these parks and squares, green horseshoe. And in this part of the city, the new library, I marked it with yellow at the map, was built. So here you can see the aerial photo of this part of the city. It's very important for understanding of this basic urban layout, because you can notice that the public buildings were built as, so to say, detached, non-attached structures, self-standing structures, while residential, mostly not exclusively, buildings were built on the edges of those squares. So you can find here University, Croatian National Theatre, University Institutes. This is the building of Craft School and Arts and Crafts Museum. So it's understandable that the Croatian government also decided to build in this part of the city the new National and University Library and State Archives. So this is, of course, this building. So it's a self-standing structures. Of those institutions that I mentioned, of special importance for the history of the library is, of course, the Craft School and Arts and Crafts Museum. We already heard yesterday about this special relationship between artists and artisans in Art Nouveau, that these borders began to disappear between artists and artisans during the Art Nouveau period, and same thing happened in Zagreb. Same thing can be analyzed also in the interiors of the building of the library and archives. And most of the artists and artisans, almost all of them actually, that worked on furnishing of the library were educated at this institution. I will emphasize some of them during my presentation. So the building of the library was planned for decades, but because of the lack of money, the Croatian government actually again started the project only in 1909 when the public competition for designs was organized, and these two designs were considered to be the best by the jury. They were both made by Zagreb-based architects, Rudolf Lubinski and Dionis Sunko, and in terms of style, they are actually very, very similar. However, government eventually decided to realize Lubinski's design because it had better organization of, or he better organized the internal structure of the building. So in 1910, this architect Rudolf Lubinski made his final designs for the building that were eventually executed. He introduced some changes in this central part of the building, but in general, it's pretty much the same as the project from 1909. So the project was eventually realized because of the efforts of the then Croatian ban, Nikola Tomašić. This ban is usually translated into English as viceroy. However, it actually means prime minister because Ban was the head of Croatian government of the period. Tomašić was a very well educated man. He owned a huge collection of books. He was interested in Oriental languages. He was also one of the most important patrons, so to say, of the modern architecture in Croatia. So it's understandable that he chose this library project as his most important project of his government, and thanks to him, a huge amount of public money was allocated for building and furnishing of the library. That's why it has, you will see it later, I think very lavishly decorated interiors, very lavishly decorated for Croatian standards. So the building of the library began at the beginning of 1911, and it was finished in the December of 1913. It was partly built of reinforced concrete because of fireproof reasons, so to say. So to be more fireproof. So not just in terms of style, but also in terms of materials used. It's an excellent example of this, so to say, early modern architecture in Croatia, or early modernist. Sorry, not early modern. It means something different in the history of art. So this is how it looked like after it was finished. If we analyze the facades of the building and also the interior, you can clearly notice that it is an example of this late Art Nouveau architecture that is characterized by the combination of elements taken from neoclassical architecture and Art Nouveau geometrical or organic even sometimes elements. Lubinski studied architecture in Karlsruhe by Josef Dum. So he actually imported into Croatia this late Art Nouveau style, or late Jugendstil style, if you want, that was characteristic for the German Empire of the period. These elements that I've mentioned earlier can clearly be seen at the southern facade of the library. If we analyze them, you can clearly notice that when Lubinski uses these neoclassical elements, he always uses them, or he always used them in an unorthodox way. So to say, he always changed something. He was putting these neoclassical details in an unusual spot, so to say. So it's a really in terms of style, interesting example of this late Art Nouveau architecture. So So this is the main facade of the building, north facade that looks toward the university. That's why this area around the main porch, main door of the building is adorned with reliefs that are containing, that are showing allegories of the faculties that existed then at the Zagreb University. On the other hand, on the other side, southern side of the facade, you can find completely different topics, so to say, allegory of education. I'm showing you these reliefs at the facades because to point out that on the facades and in the interior of the building, you can find always topics that are partly partly reflecting situation in Croatia and partly are of universal meaning. They are emphasizing the role of the building as a universal temple of knowledge, so to say. The main topic of the iconographic program of the building is Goddess Athena as a goddess of wisdom, of course, which is again understandable considering the function of the building. It appears in a painting in the building and also as a symbol, symbol of Goddess Athena. Owl appears around the dome of the building and also as part of the architecture. I don't know, can you see it because of the light? Perhaps it would be better if you turn out these first lights. The presentation would be much clearer. If it is not possible, don't bother with this. So you can also see these motifs of owls that are symbols of Athena as part of the architecture of the building. So I will try to show you this how this iconographic program actually function in this building and how it was interrelated with the architectural solution of the building. So finally, the interior. I will, of course, concentrate on the most lavishly decorated parts of the interior of the building, so not on the whole building, just the main entrance and the staircase, then professor's reading room, and finally, main reading room. The building is just too large to explain all of those solutions that architect used in decorating it. So the main entrance hall. In this part of the presentation, I need first to emphasize that this architect, Rudolf Lubinski, designed not just the basic architectural layout of the building. He designed really everything. Every single part of furnishing was designed by Lubinski and, of course, then executed by mostly Croatian artisans. Of course, other Croatian artists, painters, and sculptors participated in this process of furnishing of the building, but in this field of painting and sculpture, in terms of furnishing of the, producing of furniture and architectural details, all was done according to Lubinski's designs. So it's understandable that the style of the interior is very similar to the style of the facades of the building. So you can find this, again, specific combination of Art Nouveau elements and elements that are a little bit neoclassical, although interpreted in a completely Art Nouveau way or unorthodox way. We call sometimes this neoclassical part of the stylistic solution of this building neo-Empire or neo-Biedermeier, but it means pretty much the same as neoclassical. So what Lubinski actually designed for the interior spaces of the building. So in the main entrance hall, you can clearly notice that he used a whole set of different materials in adorning of the walls of the building. So he used a marble. and a different type of marble of different colors. He also used metalwork or various metals, mostly brass and copper, and he used also, of course, plaster for the ornamentation that was partly gilded, partly not. He designed everything, so not just the walls, but also the pavement, the ceiling of the building, the stained glasses, chandeliers. I will show them during my presentation. In the main entrance hall, you can also find the inscriptions that are of commemorative character, that are commemorating the most important people that were ruling in the time when the building was built. So the Croatian viceroys or bans, Nikola Tomašić and Ivan Škrlec, and also Hungarian Empire, Francis Joseph the First. And you can also find paintings made by Croatian painters about the doors that are leading from the main entrance hall to other internal spaces of the building. And they are very interesting because they are emphasizing this national character of the library and archives. So they are showing the most important capitals from the cultural history of Croats. And placing of all of those places into the entrance hall of the library was partially controversial at the beginning of the 20th century because only part of those cities were actually within the border of this semi-autonomous Croatia. So for example, Dubrovnik was in the province of Dalmatia, so it was a different province of the Habsburg monarchy in the time, and Jajce was and still is in Bosnia. So it was like with placing of those places in the entrance hall of the library, so the cultural space of Croats was marked, which was, as I've said, for the period very controversial. It's interesting that professor's reading room doesn't contain these explicit national messages, so to say. It's completely international in terms of iconography. So it's, of course, interesting that professors had their own reading room that was separated from students' reading room. So it is like an elite space, of course, for this period. It's very characteristic. It contains only 16 seats because Zagreb University was very, very small. Well, 16 seats around the table. There are also some seats in the corner. I'm not sure what they were used for. Probably for afternoon napping because there's no table there, or perhaps they could also smoke there. You cannot exclude that, at least not in Croatia still. It's a very, very unusual space. In terms of iconography, so to say, or messages that this space contains, it's, as I've said before, very international. So there is this painting of Goddess Athena and two allegories of the arts and sciences, because this is the temple of not just sciences but also arts. And if you look at the symbols that these artists used, you can notice that they are of, so to say, all European quality. So they are not Croatian. You can find in the background of this sciences painting the Karpos fountain from the Luxembourg Park in Paris, and on this arts painting, the Erechtheion from the Acropolis of Athens. It's interesting that there are no explicit national symbols there. In terms of style, of course, these paintings have some Art Nouveau secessionistische elements, especially this Auers painting, but they are much more academic than the architecture. In terms of style, I will go back just one step. I think this professor's reading room is much more conservative than all other spaces of the library because it contains many more these classical elements in comparison to the main entrance hall or the main reading room, the biggest, of course, space in the building. I'm sorry, because of the light, you cannot properly actually see all the part of the photo, but I think you can get the basic information also from this photo. So the main reading room with 176 seats. In terms of style, as you can see, it's much more Art Nouveau. It also contains some neoclassical elements, but always connected with this geometrical type of Art Nouveau. In terms of this iconographic program, it is somewhere between this entrance hall and the professor's reading room. So it contains national and international messages, so to say, or international and national topics alike. The biggest painting that was installed in the room was made by the then most appreciated Croatian painter, Vlaho Bukovac. It shows the development of Croatian culture. It shows actually most important writers, patrons of art, painters, and so on, from the history of Croatian culture. In terms of style, it's actually very academic. But the paintings about entrances, and entrances are always very emphasized, as you can see in this building. Those are those threshold spaces that we were hearing about yesterday. So about the entrances, you can find the paintings with much more international messages. So the allegories of antique, medieval, and contemporary science that include again those like heroes from the history of European culture and science. Dante, aviator, or like the scientist with a microscope. It also could be connected to the things that Madame Aubry was talking about yesterday. Sorry, I talked too much, but she emphasized yesterday that the Art Nouveau is always reflecting itself, or it always has some kind of reflection related to the new findings in natural sciences. So this could also be found in this National and University Library in Zagreb. So sculpture of the main reading room. I'm approaching the end, don't worry. Sculpture in the main reading room are also of this universal, all European character. So they show the Greek philosophers, or these putos, or kids playing with feathers or books. So they are of course symbolizing this I don't know, urge for knowledge from the early age. I don't know, did you notice it? But all of the artworks were done by Croatian artists. It was possible because of this political position that Croatia had, as I said earlier, in the monarchy. So the government was controlling the process of building of the library. It was giving money, so it had an opportunity to employ exclusively Croatian artists and artisans. So all of those bookshelves, tables, chairs were made by Croatian artisans. They were made also of these wooden parts of high quality Croatian oak, and they were all made according to Rudolf Lubinski's design. He used different type of design for every room in the building. So a catalog room, even offices of employees, and he, of course, didn't employ only the people that are working with wood, but also he ordered these pillars that were made of ceramics from the ceramic factory of Zagorka near Zagreb. The Zagreb Artisans Gilded, part of the Stuko Zagreb mosaic factory, made mosaics in the building, and so on and so on. These metal parts of the building were also made by by local artisans. These are covers of the radiator. I don't know, are the radiators original, because someone is researching it in Brussels. I've heard that from Guy yesterday. I'm not sure. I didn't look behind the covers, but covers are original. And also these copper flower pots, they were all made by this metal. How do you used some English term that I'm not very familiar with, metalsmiths. Yeah, metalsmith Isidor Haramia. And you can, of course, find names of many of them installed into the furnishing or this decoration all over the building. Mr. Beck asked me today, is there any Croatian ceramic factory? So there is this Zagorka that I forgot to mention you earlier, but it was part of this Wienerberger Ziegelfabrik, so it was part of much bigger like factory, and this is the local Zagreb factory, Armin Schreiner. This is also a local Zagreb firm that produced mosaics and stained glass windows. However, unlike this artistic craft that was very, so to say, developed in Croatia because of this craft school, this artistic industry, I don't know, is this the right term in English, but I'm referring to the German term Kunstindustrie. Kunstindustrie was not so developed in Croatia, so many things that had to be industrially produced were actually imported for the library. So I'm approaching the end. So this is the stained glasses. They are completely preserved all over the building, mostly produced in Zagreb, these two. However, those are produced in Vienna, and in Vienna all the chandeliers were also produced because we didn't have our own factory. Just to show you few photos, they are different in every room of the building. There are a huge number of various types of chandelier. And just for the conclusion, the building is used today as exclusively state archives, so it's not a library anymore. But unlike all of those buildings that we were hearing about last 2 days that are mostly privately owned, this was owned by the state from the beginning. It's still owned by the state, and that's, of course, a lucky thing because state financed the building and furnishing of the building. It financed also in last 20 years its restoration. So the main reading room is now used by the users of state archives, and that's why it is completely preserved. Thank you very much, and sorry for being so long.